Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are gathered here in some indeterminate time toward the end of the year, Rod. That sort of amorphous time between, the Christmas season and the New Year celebrations. And we wanted to get together today, folks, to just sort of, do a quick recap of the year. Nothing serious, but really more from a prospective standpoint, Rod.
Yeah.
So, we were hoping to think forward, see what we see, what we hope for, what we fear for, those kinds of things. So, how is the winter season there in Hungary?
I got to say, Kale, this is the first time I've had a Christmas that's actually cold. I mean, reliably cold. You know how it is in Louisiana. Sometimes you can have a cold Christmas. It sounds like they're going to have one this year, but sometimes you can walk around in shorts and a t-shirt. But here in Budapest, it's cold, bruv. It's really cold. And I just had a wonderful visit by my friend Anna and her husband and her two little bitty kids, Ursh and Piri. And they brought me, they call me Rod Bachi, which means Uncle Rod. They brought me a bottle of Palinka.
See, there you go.
Palinka, this is plum, Silva Palinka. Palinka is the thing that all the Hungarians drink. I mean, I think in Slavic countries they call it slivovitz, but it's just basically a fruit brandy, not sweet at all, and it's really yummy stuff. But that's going to get me through the cold winter ahead.
Well, I stocked up myself. I got I got a little gin, got a little bourbon, so we should be fine for the Christmas season.
Man,
anyway,
there's nothing quite like. Let me just stop you right there. Is there anything quite as good as a Manhattan of the holiday seasons? With Luxardo cherries, those awesome.
Yeah.
Man.
Well, you're speaking my language, because that is exactly what I like. I love, and I'm just a huge Campari fan. I love Campari as well. So I got some stuff, to kind of make it work. The Luxardo cherries are not optional. No. They are absolutely essential, and you have to pay the $20 or whatever, $25 it is for a small jar of those cherries, because they really are a deal changer.
It's so worth it. I remember the first time I had them, I thought maraschino cherries are maraschino cherries. Oh, right. No. The Luxardo cherries are something special. And it's that treat you save to the very bottom of your cocktail. And they're sweet, but they're just so rich and delicious. Yeah. I was in Rome since you and I talked last. And it was a great time. We can talk about it a bit if you want. But the reason I bring it up now is I love truffles. Have you ever had truffles?
I've never had truffles.
Wow.
Yeah. I've never.
It's like some kind of, I think they're in the mushroom family. They're a fungus, and they're so aromatic and so good. They don't taste like anything else. It's kind of like oysters in that way. Nothing tastes like them. But, and they're so good on pasta. And when I was in Rome, I went doing some Christmas shopping. I bought something at a store, and I asked the clerk, I said, look, it's lunchtime. Is there any restaurant in this neighborhood that does good truffles? Well, he sent me to Nino. Well, I sat down at Nino and looked at the menu. I didn't see any black truffles. You got black truffles and white truffles. White truffles are very, very rare and very expensive.
Right.
All they had was white truffles on the menu. They had a dish of pasta with white truffles. Kale, it was $80. For a dish of pasta. And I was like, dude, I can't pay that. I mean, am I a nut? But then I thought, well, I can't get up and leave. And I thought, I really want these truffles. So, all right. So I said, it's Christmas. I'm in Rome. I did it. Dude, it was worth every penny. They brought up this pasta in a cream sauce with little white truffles shaved all over it.
I was going to ask, did they shave them?
And it looked like cornflakes all over the top of the pasta. But I mixed it all up, and just this aroma. It's like putting your head over a pot of boiling stew. I mean, it's just so good. And every single bite, it was just like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, like seriously.
No, seriously.
Yeah. No.
It was. I'll probably never do that again, but I'm awfully glad I did it. That's how I used to live in Rome, right?
Yeah, well, I spent a big chunk of time in Rome, about for a whole semester. I lived there, and it's one of those things. This is back in the winter and spring of '93, And it's one of those things that I certainly enjoyed it at the time, and I lived it up, had a great time, saw everything. I mean, I did not squander it. You know what I mean? But boy, there really is something about youth being squandered on the young. It's in retrospect, I loved it at the time, but you're just never quite sure if you really, really appreciated it. But boy, I love Rome. I really do. It was it was the first time I'd left the country as a kid, as a young man, and I lived in Trastevere, which is the old section of town. One of the most ancient portions of the city, and it still has maintained a real sense of kind of a city neighborhood. And wow, what a treat to be able to do that. My neighborhood church, like the church that I went to on Sundays, was Santa Maria in Trastevere, which is one of the titular churches in Rome, meaning it was one of the original meeting spots of the early persecuted church, and just wild stuff like that.
That's what Rome is like. I mean,
treat.
it's just every time you turn the corner, there's some reminder of the early church.
Well, and it was around the block. It was maybe a 10-minute walk from where I was staying. Was Saint Cecilia, what you wrote about a couple of weeks ago, and just that sense of the faith as not being like just American, or that the faith not just being something that happened in the last 100 years or so, but it was that the faith of our inheritance grew out of real suffering and real actual martyrs, and it was no joke. I mean, I think that really transformed my appreciation and perception of things, both in time and in terms of space and in terms of my faith. That and I think that has left an indelible mark on even just how I see things now. And how I see the various permutations of church politics and theological arguments and discussions, and picking up something that we talked about the last time you and I got together to shoot shoot an episode, that that when you don't understand the faith having come out of the most humble and absurd beginnings, you can begin to think of it as a kind of altar and throne reality first. And so that our faith, right, in 2022, you and I talk quite a bit about, we're living in negative world Christianity. Well, there was an original negative world Christianity out of which we sprung, which was no joke. And I think this picks up in part, that Rome, as you said last time, Rome was synonymous with the machine. Rome was synonymous with the demonic,
the Roman Empire,
with the forces. With the forces of evil. And, so the redemption of Rome was no joke and no laughing matter. So anyway, I always will have, I can still smell Rome. I can still hear Rome. I can hear the bells. I can hear the sirens. I can hear the traffic. I can hear the mopeds. It's something I carry around with me all the time. And boy, I can taste Rome too still. Like you said.
Well, one of the things that I love about it is, nobody does coffee like the Italians. Nobody. And you can go into any coffee shop, nothing special, have the best coffee in the world for $1, $2, and you can't find coffee that good anywhere in North America. You can find great coffee in North America, but it's just a special place. And I've been there several times, never really felt it like I felt it now. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact simply that it's late fall, early winter there, and the weather, it's not hot, but also the work I've been doing on my book about re-enchantment. And as you and our regular listeners know, I recently went to the ancient capitals, or not capitals, ancient cities of the churches in Asia Minor, the churches mentioned in the book of Revelation. And it really put me in a mindset of civilizational rise and fall. And Rome has seen it all. I remember when I finished at Trastevere, I went to pray at the St. Cecilia Church at her tomb, where she and her husband Valerianus, I mean, they were martyred in the third century. Right. I prayed there, and then was walking back to my hotel on the other side of the river, and just stopped at a bridge over the Tiber, and just beheld this. The Tiber's full now; it's winter, and you could hear the rushing water. And I thought, Lord have mercy, what has this river seen over the last 3,000 years?
No kidding, huh? I mean, this is crazy, and you really can. If you've never been to Rome, the Tiber rushes through the city, the center of the city. Like it's a pretty violent. It's not a slow amble. Like if I remember is it the Seine in Paris? It's a much gentler sort of. It kind of rolls through Paris, and it's sort of fine and lovely. But the Tiber is a pretty rapid river. So,
and I'm looking over, or as we're talking, I'm looking over the top of my laptop at the Danube outside, and it's almost looks like a lake today. It's so gentle, but that's not the Tiber.
Yeah, but what it's seen, you're right. I mean, what it's seen is the flow of time, right? The flow of time is no joke. So.
Well, what do we got today, bro?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about just what are you expecting to see? I mean, you're in the middle of as we've joked, in the middle of this past year. We're living through big history, big time. I mean, what do you see kind of coming on the horizon? Maybe in politics, or maybe even in terms of thought. Culture. These kind of things. You've had your finger on a pulse over there. I'm just curious to hear what you have to say.
The war, the Russia-Ukraine war, is still in everybody's mind over here. Just since we last talked, I watched a video on unheard.com. Freddie Sayers interviewed John Mearshiemer. He's the University of Chicago professor, foreign policy realist, who has been very critical of American foreign policy towards Russia. From the point of, not because he's pro-Russian, but because he's pro-American. And he was just brutal about how he believes Washington provoked this war. And I think he's right about it, frankly, by making all these aggressive moves toward Russia. But Freddie Sayers, the interviewer, asked him at some point, he said, so what do we do now? I mean, where's the hope? And Mearsheimer, who is this giant of American foreign policy scholarship, says, we're screwed. And what he meant by that, Sayers asked him to talk about it. What he meant by that is that at this point, Russia cannot afford to lose this thing, but neither can Washington, because if Washington,
meaning what? What do you mean you can't afford it? I mean, you're not talking money.
No, he's talking about in terms of prestige, and I mean, if Russia gets beaten back in Ukraine, right on its border, it will be a tremendous blow to them. There'll be all kind. They just can't. They can't let it happen. It's existential to them. At the same time, said Mearsheimer, Washington has committed so much to this proxy war with Russia that it can't lose either. So it's got to grind on and grind on and grind on. And Mearsheimer said that there is a non-trivial chance that nuclear weapons will be used. So he said that if Russia gets to the point where it is going to be beaten, or it sees it's going to be beaten, it's going to probably drop a battlefield nuke. And that, he said, is probably going to bring the war to an end, because he said, I can't imagine a scenario in which the West does not say, okay, we've gone too far, this has to come to an end. But my God, if that's even a possibility, and this is what Mearsheimer says too. He says that in the Cold War, it was actually more stable, because we knew that we couldn't go, and Russia knew it couldn't go past a certain line. But we're not there anymore. Right. So, I mean, I hate to be so glum at the end of the year, but it's ongoing here in Hungary, where I live now. And man, whoever thought a year ago I would have been saying that. But here in Hungary, where I live now, people are really, really suffering economically from the war. It's happening all over Europe. And I think that there was a lot of hope that this thing would be settled soon. There would be peace. But it looks like it's not going to happen. And there could be a lot of turmoil politically within Europe next year.
Well, what I find interesting, just listening to your thoughts there, is that, I still don't get a sense here, stateside, that people are even really admitting that it's a proxy war. Maybe I'm being naive about that, but I don't feel. I mean, I think people are scared to say that sort of thing out loud, because they'll immediately get smeared as a Putin apologist or something like that. I don't know. I don't get the sense, Rod, that people are admitting to the fact, or admitting to the claim, maybe, that this is actually a proxy war.
Well,
I mean, then the question is, well, how would you define a proxy war if this ain't it?
Yeah. Well, here in Budapest, I wasn't here for this, but the institute I work for, the think tank, the Danube Institute, held a geopolitics summit in early December. And one of the speakers was Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia, super hawkish towards Russia. And I didn't get to hear his speech, but a Hungarian friend of mine was there to hear his speech. And she said that he was just pushing about, we got to keep giving it to Russia, never let up. But then he said, we got to be careful about China, because in Australia, if we have conflict with China, it could affect our trade routes and blah, blah, blah. Well, my Hungarian friend said it made her really angry to hear that, because she said, I wanted to stand up and say, don't you understand that this war in Russia, it's not with Russia and Ukraine, it's not affecting you in Australia, it's not affecting America, it's really affecting us. So you seem to care a lot when it could hurt your country economically, when regional conflict could do that, but we in Central Europe are just an abstraction. So I would say, I would say to our American listeners, it's like, it's not an abstraction over here. People who are not in Ukraine are still hurting immensely. People are cold and hungry right now because the price of fuel has gone up so much because of the war.
Well, it's interesting, because we Americans can, by the privilege of our position on the globe and our isolation, we can be naive about both of these sort of potential conflict zones in some real sense, right? It's kind of an abstraction in Russia and Ukraine. It's kind of an abstraction in China, but where the rubber hits the road, are those so-called those trade routes, like the supply chains. That's the buzzword of the last couple of years, right? Is supply chains. All right. So, but you're right that, we can sort of do the armchair quarterbacking all day long. And for people much closer to it, it's not an armchair situation at all. It's quite real.
I think, too, on the domestic front, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to Donald Trump in the first few months of 2023. As you and I are talking, the House voted to release his tax returns on a strict party line vote. I think they're going to be embarrassing to him, but Trump has really shot himself in the foot recently with meeting with these anti-Semites, and he had this really big announcement the really big announcement, this is in mid-December, I guess, was that he was selling NFTs.
It's so weird, dude. I don't even know. I honestly, it's one of the things that came out. Like, I saw a picture of something like him. He looks like Superman in like a cartoons. I just like, I didn't even know what to think about it. I was like, whatever. I just ignored it. But it's all weird. It's just very weird.
That's just it. I mean, some of the weird stuff he does, it can be enjoyable because it's owning the libs. But this is just weird to no particular purpose. And I think that the Washington Post had a really interesting piece this week. Clearly, people around Trump are leaking, saying that, there he is at Mar-a-Lago. He's surrounded himself with sycophants. Nobody's paying attention to him. He's brooding. And, I think that we're seeing real vulnerability there, which is all to the good for Ron DeSantis. But, we'll see what comes out of the January 6th investigation. One of the things that just blows my mind reading the American media from this side of the ocean is how obsessed they are with January 6th. I think it was... Well, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it is only a media obsession because nobody gives a rat's behind about it, Rod. I mean, it's this weirdest... It's like a strange... Well, it's almost like NFTs, right? Yeah. Like nobody cares about NFTs except for the small niche group of people who care about NFTs, right? Or can even explain it or understand what a non-fungible token actually is. It's bizarre. Well, if you recall, last January 6th, a year ago, it was very clear to me that the media elite and our political elite, especially in Camp Democrat land, were very invested in turning this into a kind of almost like a remember Pearl Harbor type situation, if you recall that. I mean, Kamala Harris got up and did a solemn. I mean, they're treating it like some sort of strange solemnity, and I just don't think Americans give a rat's behind about it. I really don't. And I know you could probably accuse me of being sort of in a bubble, but honest to goodness, nobody even cares about it, Rod. Yet, in a couple of weeks now, when we're back at year two of the memorial of January 6th, it's going to be all over again. It's going to be all over MSNBC and CNN and blah blah blah, the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they're going to try to do it again. I think.
Yeah. And I don't get it. I thought what happened on that day was horrible, but it's so clear that this has become to the Democrats what Benghazi was to the right, something that people were just obsessed with. I used to call my mom whenever I was living out away from Louisiana. I guess we were in Philly then, and she would just Benghazi, 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 and I'm like, you live in rural Louisiana, but she was just watching a whole lot of Fox, and
that's right.
But it's just what they kept. It was the wound they kept poking, but. Anyway, so I think that's going to go on, but I am.
Well, I mean, why do you think? Just to keep on Trump just for a second? I mean, why do you think that it'll make any difference amongst the primary type voter?
Well, I just think that people above all want to win, and I think that this is just my sense is that even among Republicans. They sense, even among MAGA people, they sense that Trump has lost it. A friend of mine back in Alabama was texting me that when the news came out that Trump had hosted this log cabin Republicans, a gay Republican fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, and he gave a speech saying that, nobody's fought harder for gay rights than I have, and he talked about, quote, our movement. This really threw a lot of these social conservative evangelical types back. They're like, wait a minute, really? Of course, Trump's always been this way, but now they're I think that all of this stuff, the Kanye West insanity, and the NFT thing, and now the big gay fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, I think these things are cumulative, and it makes Trump, he's definitely lost a lot of his luster. Now, he's surely got a whole lot of devotees. I mean, he sold out his NFTs like that. He made like $4 million on it. But I'm just trying to set it up saying I think we're going to see the slow decline of Trump next year as a factor in Republican politics.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, what about on the Dem side? I mean, what do you see? What kind of bench do they have? What are they going to do? Are they going to ditch Biden? I put out a tweet the other day. I don't know if you saw it, but never in my lifetime have I witnessed a more irrelevant person than Joe Biden. And I'm not saying this in a partisan way. Everybody knows that I don't like Joe Biden. That's fine. But I'm not really commenting on this like, oh, he doesn't matter. Like, I just mean like kind of literally, like nobody cares about him. Like he's not relevant.
Yet.
And I don't remember a more irrelevant executive.
Yet doesn't he still get things passed in Washington? The Democrats.
Well.
Go ahead.
Okay. Good. Well, yeah, but I mean like him.
Yeah, I mean as a leader.
Like, I mean him.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, he's doddering, he's senile. I think that if the Democrats had been wiped out by a red wave, as was expected, you and I would be sitting here talking about what are they going to do to replace some of the 2024 ticket, but they weren't. And I think actually this is going to work to the Republicans' advantage because Biden has clearly got lots and lots of weaknesses. And if the Republicans can put up a vigorous young Ron DeSantis versus doddering old Uncle Joe, I think that it's going to make the choice a lot clearer, especially because I think conservative Democrats, if there are a few left, will be more drawn to DeSantis because, and Biden has just gone so far on this stuff. He had this signing ceremony at the White House in December for the gay marriage bill, and he brought drag queens into the White House. And maybe I'm naive, but I got to think that the ordinary people, are just getting weary of it.
Well, and as per usual, everybody's got a large social media history. A 15-second Google search of this fellow, this drag queen, would show you like he's got lots of really loathsome content.
Oh, the one who was at the White House.
Yeah, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like what is this? Is it? Do you feel like it's just kind of virtue signaling to the Democratic faithful?
Yeah. Look, this is their thing. I mean, the LGBTs are sacred to them.
Well, it's really the T. It's really the T and the Q.
Yeah.
Let's be blunt. Yeah. It's the T and the Q. Yeah. The LGBs are done. I mean, it's as far as relevance within this movement, it would seem. It's really more about the
T's. Yeah, right? You're right. Because even most Republicans are fine with gay marriage now. But
right.
But yeah, it seems like, what is the line with these people? That on Twitter this week, there's been a video going around of a drag queen Christmas show that was held in Austin, Texas. I think it's.
Dude,
I know.
I couldn't believe it. When I saw, I was like. And not Rod. Sorry, go describe it. I'll just say that even I was shocked.
When I tell you pornographic, I mean it. I mean, they were simulating anal sex and oral sex. This is a family-friendly Christmas drag show.
I mean, I can't believe we even have this title that you and I can say with a straight face.
So to speak.
A family-friendly drag queen show.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah, and one of them, I think, gave birth to a sausage, and another one had a fake breast frame. I mean, it was insane. And what kind of freak parents take their kids to this? But it was so sexual. And I've adopted James Lindsay's term for drag queens. He doesn't want to call them drag queens anymore. He wants to call them groomer clowns. Well, these were groomer clowns, without question. Yeah. And it just goes on. And it goes on. Yeah. And nobody says anything. I mean, people like you and me rant, but
yeah, you and I mean, but we're non-persons from this point, so that's fine. But I mean, so looking forward to 2023, do you see the groomer clown phenomena continuing, moving forward, and nobody's going to blink and say that we're just going to sort of accept this? It seems like it's some sort of dare on the part of those wanting to push. Continue to push the cultural envelope, the queering envelope, to see like how much can they get away with before Normie Joe and Normie, Joanne say, you know what, I think we're done here.
I wish I could tell you. It's gone so much farther than I thought it would. I don't feel comfortable at all saying like, oh, the backlash is coming. I think
I don't know. I don't
if there is a backlash, then it's going to be so unbelievably savage. It's going to be something that probably scares you and me. Look, we joke, or I've joked for years about we live in Weimar America, the references to Weimar Germany, the decadent, unstable period before the rise of the Nazis, that the Nazis became popular because people in Germany wanted stability and they wanted to push back on all this. Well, I fear that something like that could come here. And, since you and I talked last, I got into this huge row online because I criticized this guy, former headmaster of my kid's school, who had been exposed as having this secret online life as a white supremacist, anti-Semite, and all that. And the only reason it made news was because he was a podcast co-host with Stephen Wolfe, who has a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism that's gotten a lot of attention. Right. Anyway, I said on my some recent blog, I criticized him and said, we got to be careful. We got to police this sort of thing on our side because racism is evil. We can't have it. Somebody, a guy named Charles Haywood, said, who's a really, really smart guy, but very far to the right. He said, no enemies to the right. And I took on that. I said, wait, we can't be that. You can't be no enemies to the right, because this guy, the former headmaster, I don't want to say his name even now because the guy's been ruined professionally. I want him to have a chance to repent and build his life back. But anyway, he had been recommending on his Goodreads page Mein Kampf, not ironically, and other.
So, right, and so I think you correctly are like, look, this doesn't have a place. Right. You can't. This is bad stuff. So you use this phrase, "no enemies to the right," and I wonder if you could take a second to explain to the audience or unpack for the audience this sort of would you call it a Schmittian frame?
Sort of. Charles Schmitt. Carl Schmitt. Thank you. Carl Schmitt was a German legal theorist. He was a theorist of the Nazi Party, but he was beyond that. I mean, he was a legitimately brilliant mind. But one of the things he's best known for is talking about the friend-enemy distinction in politics. He said that's the most important one. Who are your friends? Who are your enemies? Everything else is a secondary question. Well, this idea has taken hold on the contemporary right now, and you see it. The guy Haywood, who attacked me really very personally, he said that he doesn't. He said in his essay, "I don't care whatever the headmaster said. No enemies to the right, because defeating the left and crushing it, and salting the like
insulting the earth.
That is the most important thing, and then we can sort the rest of this out. I think that's really, really dangerous, because no enemies to the right is how you get this guy, the headmaster, embracing outright racism in Mein Kampf.
Yeah, well, my question about the no enemies to the right thing and the friend-enemy distinction and the desire to eliminate the left and salt the earth with it is, I mean, just what would that actually look like? In other words, I certainly have, look, you're not going to find anybody more anti-communist, anti-Marxist than me, and insofar as the left continues to be animated by the spirit of Karl Marx and his followers, I find disgusting and in need of pushback in a very serious way. And we can talk about that in the educational frame in a minute if you'd like, because that's where it has the biggest purchase in our own world right now. But I just wonder, like, they want to, quote unquote, eliminate the left. Well, I mean, like, what does that look like, Rod? I mean, like, what would that practically be like? So, like, all those people right now who consider themselves of the left, like, where did they go? Did they just go away?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Like, I mean, I'm curious. Like, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, and at what point do you stop? Does crush the left mean eliminate human beings? That's the thing.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm getting at. Right. I mean, like, they're not, you think of like whatever, some sort of like online lefty who's got a big Twitter following. What, they're just going to like die on you? They're going to be like, oh, my bad. Now I'm part of the right. Like, it doesn't seem to be serious, like in a mature way.
Yeah, it's not. And I don't want to be ruled by people who are on my side, but who believe that the way to treat people who are to the left of them is to persecute them, jail them, and I think these people would be happy to do that. And I mean, and I should say a caveat here: the left has seeded all of this stuff with its radicalism. In spaces controlled by the left, institutional spaces controlled by the left, like universities and media,
that's right.
They push the right out. And I get the temptation, the no enemies to the right temptation on the right, because they see that the left basically lives like that, and look how much power they have. The problem is, where do you stop? If the fact that this guy Haywood said he doesn't know what the headmaster stands for and doesn't care. He wrote that. He doesn't care. Like, well, you better care, because the guy's objectively pro-Nazi. And are we willing to go that far? I'm not.
Right.
It's certainly not as a Christian. And that's the thing. My Christian faith is more important than my politics. I can imagine, Kale, a situation like Spain during the Spanish Civil War, when there was no center. You were either with the communists or with the nationalists, which were fascist adjacent. Francisco Franco wasn't a fascist, but he was fascist adjacent. But they were burning down convents and mass murdering priests and raping nuns, the left was. So I would have been on the side of General Franco, no question about it. But we're not at that place right now, and I hope we never get to it. You know, in that case, maybe we can talk about no enemies to the right, but we're a long way from there, and I don't want to, and I hope that if we ever get to a situation like Franz Jägerstätter, the blessed Franz Jägerstätter, who's being on the road to being made a saint in the Catholic Church because he stood up to the Nazis. He wasn't a left-winger. He was a faithful Catholic, but he would not sign an oath of loyalty to Hitler because he said it would violate my conscience as a Christian. And I hope that, I could see the people on the right as well as the people on the left being happy to put people like me to death because we didn't side with them.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the, that's my, one of the things that you and I have spoken about, over the past year has been this, unease that we have with that I think both of us share, with folks that would sort of want to be sort of a nationalist, post-liberal, reality. And that one of the things that makes me uneasy about it is precisely sort of the question is like, how are we just going to get along? How are we going to live? And it's a human question, and to think that you can abstract that problem out to sort of turn everything into friend and enemy. I mean, to me, that's a form of kind of Gnostic wishing it were so. Wish you could just turn everybody into, the bad guys with the wrong colored jerseys so you can vanquish your enemy. But I just don't think that that's how life really works.
We're all related to people who are on the left, and people on the left are related to us. It can happen in Germany. When the Nazis came to power, families were broken up. Whenever political extremists come to power, it could be family against family. I don't want to live in that world. If circumstances drive us to it, well, then that's our curse. That's our historical curse. But my God, let's resist it for as long as we can. Because I have to constantly remind myself, because I get in there and throw some heavy punches in the culture war rhetoric, but every single person bears the image of God. That's a fundamental part of our faith. And when we forget that, when we allow our minds to become so polluted by ideology, whether it's religious ideology or political ideology, that's when we're in real trouble. I remember, Kale, about the summer after 9/11, my wife just begged me to go see a therapist because I was so boiling with anger over what happened on 9/11 and also the Catholic abuse scandal. But 9/11 was the trigger. And I remember sitting down with this guy, the therapist at the first session, him telling me, said, by the time we finish here, you're going to need to realize that you could have been piloting those planes too. Man, I was offended. I wanted to take a swing at the guy. I'm like, no way. I couldn't have done it. And I ended up not going back to the therapist for other reasons. But it took a long time for me to finally realize, like over a decade, guy was right. I've been so angry before at people who have hurt others that I can see becoming so inflamed with ideology, religious or otherwise, or political, where I didn't care. Just burn it all down, fly the plane into the building, make them hurt. And that's a scary thing. Every one of us has that potential.
Amen, man. I really agree with it. For me, that's always been kind of my working definition of ideology, right? Is that an ideology allows you to indulge the great temptation, I think, to turn human beings into functions, rather than recognizing their image-bearing reality, right? So that my problems with extreme communism do this. My problems with extreme, with fascism, this is the temptation, right? You're creating other people, right? My problem with radical feminism is that it turns men into, the sort of the non-human beings, like the non-worthies, the deplorable. So I think that any time that your framework allows you to indulge in that desire, which is a real one, right?
Yeah.
To fall into this friend enemy thing, to me that's where you've now crossed over into this danger zone, where you turn yourself into a monster because you're trying to fight the monster.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is related. You've probably been following all the stuff coming out of Canada about the euthanasia program there, and about how thousands of people are availing themselves of it, not because they're terminally ill, but because they're poor or they're unhappy. And I mean, it's amazing how fast this has collapsed and how doctors are pushing this on people. Well, this is what happens in a post-Christian culture. This is what happens in a culture when you cease to believe that every human being is a bearer of the image of God, imago Dei. And it takes many forms. Whenever I see these leftists who have far, far more institutional power than the far right, talking about whiteness, reducing human beings to the color of their skin or their gender, or I realize that this is what it means to live in a post-Christian society. It's not to say this didn't happen when under Christendom. It did, but we had the resources to fight back then. Now, with the Christian faith in deep decline, where's the fight back going to come from? Where are you going to tell people in Canada, you know what, life is worth living? And people who aren't sick. I mean, I see this is where this mindset is going to take us, Kale. In Nazi Germany, with the euthanasia program, the Nazis put up propaganda posters on the streets to promote euthanasia, forced euthanasia for the mentally and physically disabled. And the poster said, I put one on my blog last week, poster said, it costs 60,000 Deutschmarks to take care of this disabled person for a year. That's your money, brother. They said this. And what happens in Canada when this new regime and for the sake of autonomy and progressivism, when this assisted suicide regime get to the point where people feel like, why should I spend my tax money taking care of these poor people? Why don't they just commit suicide? They're a drag on society.
Well, truly, deplorable, or to sort of use the sort of the Scroogean term from A Christmas Carol. This is part of the surplus population that needs must be culled from time to time. And what and a more lighthearted example, there's a great old episode now of The Simpsons. I believe it was in season 4 or 5. And Homer has been diagnosed with some kind of heart condition or something, and he's going into the hospital, and Smithers and Mr. Burns are looking at the reports, and Smithers says something like, this man is costing you, thousands of dollars per day, on our current health program. And so Burns goes to the hospital, and he goes into the room to see how Homer is doing, and he turns to the doctor and he says, "I demand that this man die with dignity." Because he's running the very simple cost benefit analysis of the insurance is expensive and it's going to cost him out all this money, and but all joking aside, I mean, this is essentially what the Canadians appear to be doing, which is to demand that for really a growing number of reasons that these Canadians should die with dignity.
Yeah.
Which is, which is just horrible, right? I know.
No, you're right. I'm just saying that it's crazy. And one of the things that distinguished the early Christian church from the Roman society around it is they didn't expose their babies. That is, in ancient Rome, it was a perfectly legal practice. If you didn't want your newborn, just go leave it out, and a baby would die from exposure, or someone would grab it and raise it to be a slave or a prostitute. This was normal. Human life was cheap.
Right.
The Christians didn't do that. The Christians would try to rescue these babies and give them.
And remember, Rod, there were freaks for this.
Yeah.
We Christians were freaks for accepting the ludicrous assertion that all of us are somehow have dignity, like the slave have dignity. This is just absurd.
Yeah.
A girl have dignity. This is just crazy and absurd.
Yep.
And boy, we forget this. Man, we forget this.
Yeah. If people haven't read it yet, the historian Tom Holland's great book Dominion is this epic history of how Christianity made the Western world. And Tom Holland, he's explicit. When he started the book, he wasn't a believer. I don't know if he's a believer now, but he said it taught him how everything that he values as a classical liberal came out of Christianity and nowhere else. Yeah. And he says the same thing, that we forget that at our peril. But we are forgetting it. Britain, I'll be going to England for Christmas. I'm really looking forward to it. But England, recently, they just had some statistics come out for the first time since its Christianization. Majority of people in Britain are not Christians, do not define themselves as Christians. It's not because they're Muslim, many are, but it's that they don't believe in anything. And we are going to see what it means to be in a society where these beliefs that we've all taken for granted are no longer there, holding up the structure of civilization. I think it's going to get a lot coarser and a lot more violent.
So, all right. So let's tack real quick here. For the last quarter of the show, two religious questions, right? Cultural/religious questions. You have for many years been the kind of chronicler of the drawdown, right? That the deposit of Christian faith and lived Christian lives has been on a slow and gradual and now quick and precipitous decline. What do you see in the coming year from the church in terms of a response to this seemingly inexorable decline?
Nothing. No, I'm serious. I wish I.
Well, what do you mean, Roger? Nothing.
They don't. They either don't see.
They? Who's they?
The religious leaders and a lot of the religious followers too, for that matter.
Okay.
They don't see it. I mean, I keep going back to this on my blog. That excellent book by historian Edward Watts called "The Final Pagan Generation." Man, read that. It's about how the pagan elites in Rome of the 4th century, a century that we now know, looking back, was when the Roman pagan Rome ended and Christian Rome began. It wasn't a sudden thing. I mean, Constantine made the empire officially Christian in the year 315, but things like that, they don't end overnight. Rome had been pagan for hundreds and hundreds of years, but it ended over the course of that century. And by the time you get to the end of the 4th century, this is according to Watts, the young people, on both Christian young people and pagan young people, they knew what time it was. They knew that things were about to turn, and there was a lot of there was violence between them. But the older pagans, they just thought, things are going to settle down. We're going to get back to normal. That's where we are in Christian society today.
Okay, so I've seen you cart this out and use it as a kind of model, but it's curious to me, and I wonder what you think about this, that in your use of the model, the final pagan generation, you really are making a kind of an argument, maybe not an argument, but you're kind of saying that this is the final Christian generation. Yeah. So how do you sort out this model?
Well, what he means by the final pagan generation is the people born in the early 4th century into paganism. They were the last generation to be raised in a fully pagan society. I believe that we are there as Christians. Certainly in Europe, it's the case. And I was reading some statistics the other day from Stephen Bullivan. We got to have him on the show. He's a British.
I'm going to meet him. Actually, I'm going to meet him next month.
Oh,
Stephen Bull. He's coming. He's coming to Rhode Island, and we're going to have a little event here.
Okay.
So I'm very much looking
very
forward.
good.
So I'll try to get him on.
Yeah, no, he's a friend of mine. We can get him on. But he's a sociologist and a Catholic convert in England, and he's got a new book out called Non-Verts about the collapse of Christianity in the United States, especially among the young. But Stephen, I think it was in Stephen's research, it said that on current trends, America will cease to be majority Christian by 2070 because people are just deconverting. And here's the thing too, Kale. Since I saw you last, I've been to Rome. I interviewed an exorcist in Rome, a guy working in Rome, very well educated man, an academic, but his side gig is working in deliverance and exorcism ministry.
So he's a practicing exorcist,
but that's not his main gig. But
got it.
We were talking about the repaganization of Europe, and we're talking about Ireland in particular, about how fast the faith collapsed there. And he knows a lot about Ireland, and he said that there's no such thing as a spiritual vacuum in a culture. So some other gods will rush in. And he said, I believe that Ireland will repaganize. They will go back to the old pagan gods, pre-Christian gods, but they will find some way to do it to make it very modern and shishi, like, Celtic spirituality and all that. But he was saying from the point of view of someone whose academic work and whose practice is in dealing with evil spirits, he said that this is going to happen. We will repaganize. I also talked, since you and I spoke last, to a man in the U.S. This is for my new book. This man is I got to be careful about it because I want to protect his privacy. But he is an academic who went into the study of esotericism and occultism in American culture and in global culture and Western culture, and was a deeply, deeply involved as a practicing occultist. Now, he's a Christian now. He came out of it, but he was telling me the same thing, that he said, we in the West are repaganizing. And he got very specific, talking about Hollywood and occult themes in Hollywood, occultist and high finance, globalist finance, things like that. The guy, I ended up speaking to him by video call too. Very serious guy and a highly trained academic. But he was like, it's real. It's happening. And, it's... So to go back to what you originally asked about the final Christian generation, if the forces driving us, there aren't a lot of people who are out as occultists, but just the way the culture is moving to becoming more and more comfortable with pagan sexuality. This is what the drag queen Christmas show is about. It's an outrageous, very vivid example, but it's an example of the sexualization, the pornification of the public square. That what's happening in Canada with assisted suicide, when people adopt essentially Roman pagan ways of seeing when is life worth living, et cetera, et cetera. It's all ultimately a spiritual warfare, and that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think you're right, too. I think that it will look slightly different sometimes. Sometimes I think it'll actually be, you see some of these sort of weirdo, occultish, neo-pagan stuff, and it looks like almost like they're playing dress up for images of antiquity. But I think it's going to take the form, it's going to be a kind of a slick, postmodern, sophisticated form of it, which is why I personally think it's so important to pay attention to the deeper patterns.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. You got it.
The patterns are the tell, and the outer effects, the clothing is going to look a little different. The music's going to look a little different. But in its essence, I think that's why it'll be hard for us to tell. And I wondered, Rod, if that's why you think in part is the reason the church's response, the collective church, right? The church's responses to the repaganization have been so weak and non-existent, and even, frankly, concurrent with, or
they embrace it, as the German Catholic bishops have done, and liberal Protestants have done. This ex-occultist in the U.S. I talked to, he told me that when he was involved with that, he said none of us ever considered the Christian churches to be any kind of threat to us, because they didn't take us seriously. They didn't take any of this seriously. There were some he said, believe it or not, the fundamentalists were often the ones who understood what was happening. He's saying this from an occult point of view. He said, as simplistic as they were, they had a better understanding of what was really going on than very sophisticated Catholics, Protestants, whatever. And I think that's just something we have to grapple with. And this is, and I think that we have been so enervated and demoralized within Christian culture and within the different Christian churches in the West that we're easy pickings for this sort of thing. This is why I think that the Benedict option model is so important, that we have got to withdraw to the extent so we can combat this stuff. We were not going to be able to combat it with average, normie, bourgeois Christianity. We have got to become much more serious about prayer, about fellowship, and all the usual stuff I talk about. Because the thing is, Kale, it's not just a good idea, it is about spiritual survival.
Right. And what strikes me, too, is the inability or the unwillingness for modern Christians, really on the left and the right, to be serious about miracles. Yeah. I know it sounds a little strange for me to bring this up right now, but I we have to understand that our faith is predicated, on a miracle, right? And this reminds me in part, I guess, with what you're trying to get us to see again through your enchantment work, right? But that miracles are real. And yet there's a dark side to that too, because those same there's a power and a force that can be manipulated for ill too, and I just don't see people being terribly serious about that.
No,
no,
but on the good side, you're talking about the miracles. I sent you last night a link to a fantastic story in the New York Times about she hasn't been canonized and may never be canonized, but a saint from our part of the world, from South Louisiana, a girl named Charlene Richard. And I'd never heard of her. Of course, I'm not a Catholic and didn't grow up down there as a Catholic, but she's a Cajun girl, little poor farm girl, died in 1959 in a lot of pain from leukemia, 12 years old. But a cult has developed around her. When I say cult, I mean that in the specific Catholic sense, meaning that people who have been asking her for the prayers, and there are a lot of people who claim miracles because of her intercession. Well, the Vatican is not satisfied yet. It may never be satisfied, but man, it did my heart good to read this story about how God used the faith of this little girl, and when she was diagnosed with acute leukemia, she had 2 weeks to live, and a priest who was a hospital chaplain, a young priest, would go with her every day, and she would offer her suffering for somebody. And it's so moving to know that kind of holiness can emerge in the rice fields of South Louisiana and his humble family. Right. That is the most wonderful thing about the Christian faith, I think, that, here we are at Christmas time, and the evil of the Roman pagan world started to come to an end in a cave where a manger was in Bethlehem. The dignity where God himself, the creator of the cosmos, became incarnate of a woman, Mary, and was born in a manger in the far outskirts of the Roman Empire. And ultimately, his followers would defeat the Roman Empire and transform it. When I was in the Vatican the other day, I was in St. Peter's Basilica. A priest who was showing me around pointed me to the baptismal chapel. It's extraordinarily elaborate font made of porphyry, one of the rarest stones.
Beautiful.
He said that baptismal font, that's from the sarcophagus of Hadrian, the emperor who was worshipped as a god. And there, the top of his sarcophagus is turned upside down, used as a baptismal font in the chief church of Latin Christendom. I mean, it's
that's so powerful.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
And I would have thought that sort of thing, that seems kind of triumphalist. But if I had not gone earlier this month to Asia Minor and learned more about what life was like for all the poor people there, especially slaves, especially women who had to be prostitutes, and how cheap their life was and how degraded they were. And Christianity came and it gave them dignity. There's that line for that verse from O Holy Night, says that he appeared and the soul felt its worth. There you go.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, right, and it's here we are. We're at we're heading into the shortest, coldest days of the year. Right, technically, we mean that, right? Here at the end of December, and we know that in the coldest, darkest time, a hope can emerge, a miraculous hope can emerge, and to see, and so we can of course understand that in a variety of different ways, all of which I think are in keeping with what we've been talking about today, Rod. But that the images, that God can redeem even this item taken from Hadrian, right? I mean, to sort of use that, not necessarily in a sort of a chest thumping rah 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 sort of way, but that even something like this can be used to the good, and that's the kind of stuff, frankly, that gives me hope in the midst of all of this. Gosh, I can't. I mean, this is twice in a row, Rod. I'm doing the hope card. I hope you'll forgive me.
Oh man.
But even the images and the tools and the apparatus of these demonic forces can be redeemed and used toward the good. It's just it's truly miraculous.
I think about, as you're talking, I think about the face of the ex-occultist, this young man. They're all younger than I am now. But the last time I had a video chat, it was with him. And to see, this is the face of someone who was redeemed, who was pulled literally out of hell by Jesus Christ and redeemed. Right. And to think that there were people around him who invited him to church, and he went. And he told me that first time he went to church, he said, this was something so different from what I had experienced in the occult. And and he wanted the light, and he ran towards the light. Well, if we had had the friend-enemy distinction, I would have been like, one who follows that would have been like, kill the guy, or like, he's trash. You can't,
That's right.
But he's redeemed, and he's when I quote him in the book, I think he's going to be a very, very powerful witness to the light and how the light brought him out of the darkness. And I got to say, I was just the other day, a lot of people are texting me, old friends, emailing, saying, "How you doing?" Because they know this has been a very hard year for me. Yeah. My wife filed for divorce back in the spring, and the divorce isn't final yet, but it's just a matter of legal time. And it's hard. It's hard to be on the other side of the ocean, away from your kids at Christmas. I'd be there if I could be, but there's a lot going on about that I can't really talk about publicly. But there's a reason I'm far away from my kids now. But my older son, Matt, is going to be flying to England. We're going to meet in England and go spend the holiday with my friends James and Helen Orr and their family in Cambridge. Really excited about that. But I got to thinking the other day, Kale, when people asking me, in all kindness, how you doing? I'm doing remarkably well, but it's because over the course of this year, God has shown me so many graces, and they're graces that have come through friends, I've been able to travel. I experienced some minor but very real miracles in Jerusalem on Holy Week. I've met so many great people this year who have been kind to me. People in Hungary have taken me in and given me meaningful work to do. People in England and all in Italy and everywhere. And it's I got no complaints, man. I really don't. And God has taken away the bitterness that was in my heart. Reading people like Ian McGilchrist this year has been huge for me. I just got turned on to C.S. Lewis. Believe it or not, I've never really read much Lewis.
So excited about this one.
Yeah.
So excited about this one.
I just started reading his space trilogy. You know who recommended it to me? The occult guy, former occultist.
Oh.
He said...
I'm interested to hear more about that, because I'm a huge fan. Like I'm a deep lover of the trilogy, honestly. I'm sorry.
No. He was just saying that Lewis, and we didn't get too far into it because I didn't know enough to ask him, but he said, Lewis gets it. He said Lewis so clearly saw what was happening. And he was telling me about the space trilogy that, the ex-occultist said when he was deeply involved in the occult and talking to the demonic and ritually with some other people, and all academics, by the way. He said that the stuff they were talking about with their plans for humanity, transhumanism, the merging of biology with technology.
Right.
This is what I sent to this guy, the ex-occultist. I sent him Paul Kingsnorth's story, The Basilisk, which you can see on paulkingsnorth.net. And the guy wrote me back and said, I'm shaking. He said, this is it. This is exactly what they're doing, what the demonic entities said they're doing. And he said Lewis saw it too, and that hideous strength. So he urged me to read it. And so I'm reading it, and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait to talk about it, because what I love about Lewis in this, and what you're bringing in here is that there is a sort of a deep connection and confluence of what we would sort of classically call like the demonic and the occult and the technical and the technological and the engineer. So there's an interesting, Lewis could see that deep connection in a way that I think people tend to keep those things separate. So, at any rate. All right. Well, look, Rod, we should wrap this up. We've hit our time goal here, but we will pick up. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the space trilogy moving forward. I've got a bunch of things that I want to get off my chest, things that I've been reading and writing and talking about. So I am really looking forward to our next year, and 2023 should be good. I'm looking forward to it.
And I can't wait for this week I'm going to have with my son, Matt, in England, an English Christmas. I've always dreamed about it, with actual plum pudding. I think I'll try one this year. And I think I'll be seeing Martin Shaw. I'm going to try to see him, go to Walsingham and see him. So, I think that we do live in a world of wonders, and I've had this brush with darkness at the interviews I've had to do, but even the exorcists I talk to, they are bearers of the light, of the true light, not the false light. And that's what I cling to at this time of year. So be of good cheer, because the battle is over.
All right, brother. Well, same to you, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.